Hi, everybody. My name is Keisuke Shingu. I'm originally from Japan and has been in the United States for quite a long time, 20 years. And let me quickly explain my background so that you can question some details about user experience and design topic as a Q&A. So I came to work for this company called Cork Express, who used to have 90% of global market share for print publishing. So all the magazines, newspapers, advertising, it was one of the design tool along with Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop, and InDesign. And my project was taking care of 2-byte languages, which is Japanese, Korean, Chinese, alongside with some design feature set. And also to bridge print layout publication into interactive format, such as Flash back then, ebooks, and SVG. Cork was one of the participants of W3C SVG specs, so I was heavily working on how to bridge print specs into SVG. And then Apple made iPhone and killed the Flash, and I feel like pretty much 10 years we lost the progress of interactive format. But recent times, because of integration with Lottie, After Effects, JSON, Qt, and a lot of design tools such as Figma, Sketch, Anima, Framer, XYZ, the interactive design area is getting more momentum lately, and I'm happy to explain that context. And after Cork, I did work for DJ technology called Beatport. They had more than 150 countries, 10,000 independent labels for electric music. It's basically the place to download all the DJ format. So I also designed the interface, how to do digital publishing system for music. And because of that, I also worked for some hardware project in Silicon Valley, Android-based portable synthesizer project. And as you can see, music application does a lot of user interface technologies with MIDI controllers, and it's basically beyond the mouse and touch interface. You use keyboard, you use DJ turntables, sometimes fancy MIDI controllers like leap motions, which is gesture motions, or some wristband that captures person's movement. So I was doing a lot of research and prototype project during, and that was featured at Google I/O, etc. And then after that, I went to Germany to work for this software and hardware company for pro audio called Native Instruments. They were making DJ software, and mainly those DJ software on real-time audio visualization and processing. So song A and B has to be smoothly mixed together with waveforms and etc. So the product you can see here, a lot of buttons, and everything is mapped into either desktop or iPad applications. So that kind of user interface connectivity is one of my expertise. And right now, I work for a company called Sound United, who owns multiple global brands such as Denon, Marantz, Polk Audio. We have a few other brands, but that's mainly the project I'm involved. And one of those devices made, let's say, coming from technology from 80s or 90s, such as CD players, amps, but at the same time, home audio, we also need to support voice agent like Alexa, Google, Apple, and along with streaming format such as Spotify, Tidal, anything you can think of. So Maybe you can ask some specific question in the Q&A if you are interested. But my focus of this presentation is how Qt is beneficial from my point of view as a UX designer. And recently, not recently, a couple of years ago, Qt started to focusing more on MCU. So MCU is basically microcontroller unit, which is not CPU. CPU is basically you have a desktop, you have a PC, a Macintosh, iOS or Android, and then OS provides a lot of functionalities. But MCU is mainly focused on providing one particular functionality per devices. For example, in the case of CD player, when you push play or rewind or forward, that's a one command. And that one command can also be matched with remote controls. So I'm going to dive down into those details, but let's appreciate what Qt is doing for MCU. And also embedded Linux is part of the interesting conversation we can have. And from global brand product development point of view, cost is very important. And then sometimes licensing is also important. How to select display devices, how to select each component of the product. And then oftentimes many displays, some people may think that, oh, you can buy small display from Alibaba. Yeah, it is good for prototype, but the question is, are those display supports my development workflow and environment, which is driver, which may be operating system, and then all the product design process gets complicated. So Qt provides those partners, and as long as you have Qt and driver integrated with the device, you can create a lot of fancy design project, which I will show you some quick prototyping project later on, from Sketch to Qt design tools. So let's see. So what kind of challenges we have on the UX is something I want to visualize first. So here's the iceberg of UX. So from top to bottom, prototype, which is easy. I mean, you can use After Effects, you can use any design tools or interactive tools, and then maybe, proofreading solutions such as InVision, click through, and getting agreement with stakeholders. That's prototype. Basically visualizing the concept and vision and get agreement. The front end, I meant front end here, integrating with front end developers. So when you work with some website project, you have somebody who takes care of the coding side, like CSS, JavaScript, JSON, SVG, whatever it is. Designer has to work with front-end developers in order to realize the prototype vision you agreed on. So that's one layer, and Qt design tools can fit into that front end, so that the designer can actually use some design tools, and then developer can take that. Because traditionally, any product development required tedious requirements process. For example, product manager creates a product requirements, and then UI designer, UX designer come up with visible user interface requirement. Then, for example, if you have a font text with certain typeface and certain size, back in the day, you had to document everything. And there are companies who still do that. But the reason why I am choosing Qt for my project is to cut that bridge. And Sketch also does that, and lesser communication about spec details such as XY coordinate of pixels or fonts, etc. It's just better to share the file and go from there. And then Qt also has a Linux and embedded system, which is really good because some medical devices, auto devices, audio devices, you don't need full operating system sometimes. For example, communication feature like phone. Do you want to make a phone call from my home speaker? Well, that my home, my CD player doesn't have to have those phone features. And then Linux environment, you can add a lot of features along with it. Then going a little bit down, remote IR commands. That's basically the main user interface for MCU-based products. Maybe microwaves that has a lot of buttons can be MCU, but when it comes to home audio products like a CD player, you don't want to go to push play button or skip the songs every time near the devices. Then remote controller is available. That concept is the same with TV. And then these days, a lot of TVs start being smart with Android and stuff. But when, again, the question is, do you want to license Android? If the company's answer is no, you have to create your own solutions. Then Qt fits very well into that perspective. So command by command interface can be integrated into finely designed touch interface, or even adding extra controls, or merging device with some display, etc. But for today's presentation, I would like to mention the importance of typography for the global audience, because oftentimes we as a designer are focusing on the best looking only one languages. For example, English, maybe German, Spanish, Japanese, Chinese. But when you create a product, you have to take care of typography. And I will share this presentation later, so you can read this. But what I'm saying here is, from print publication days, there are a lot of design features you can't still achieve in the on-screen display. And there are also features you can only achieve in on-screen display, such as smooth transition, transparency, etc., etc. And the importance of typography comes down to design template approach, which is similar to atomic design concept, let's say design template. So when you create template, you have to think about what the font means. And then this is a generic statement about typography about, for example, Times New Roman, which is originated with newspaper or any government-related document. Those are considered as official typography because that's what we used to read in the books or some documentation. The sans serif, those fonts came into more of after the web internet time, because browser could only license certain fonts, or operating systems such as Windows or Macintosh had this default set of OS, and then web browser had to use that, etc., etc. And then Linux around that time couldn't contain those designer fonts because of licensing issue. But the development side was more keen to use Linux because that's more flexible. They can make their own system. But now with Qt and monotype licensing and some of the feature set, you can really bridge those gaps in between. And that's why I'm putting the importance of typography alongside with global context, product design context. And let's talk about some design localization. This is a quick example of the length of the text varies, depends on the languages. So this is a simple text saying, I ordered roses online for my girlfriend's birthday in English. Then next one is German, which is usually 15 to 20% longer than original English. Russian is also longer than English. But when it comes to Arabic and Chinese, it's always shorter. And then Japanese are like this way. And then
how are you?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I cannot join the current talk for some reason.
I'm sorry. I need to mute other chat window. Okay. Sorry. And so this is a basic of how to apply design template, because eventually, so I was watching 2D session earlier by Brooke today, and which is beautiful demo. So, once you created the beautiful 2D layout design on the Figma or Sketch in English, and then when it comes to localization for, let's say, 10 languages globally on the same display, you all of a sudden have this spacing issue in between. And then I have a project that applies design rule set to dynamically changing the font size or character spacing or line breaks, which is very high-end typography features. And you can discover that in a 2D feature of Qt. But the whole point is how to make things look consistent. And that's very important from branding perspective. A lot of times you need to do a review by regional managers, or sometimes you need to ask native language translator so that you capture the tone of the language or functionality very well. Otherwise, user will not understand what your product does, or user gets some strange feeling about the product. That's kind of against the original UX concept. So this is a good example about how you can change the font point between Japanese and English. So this Japanese font is 1 point smaller than original English, because even though if you have a same point characters, it's different. And you can apply those template rule set into your design workflow and then dynamically render text object into your Qt project. So one of the localization flow I can show you here is left-hand side localization database. Maybe you have it on Excel, maybe you have it on online localization tool, whatever the data is, that text object should have certain language tags. For example, you have a text box for page title, but page title doesn't mean anything for other languages. It depends on how you program the product or software. When you are viewing in German mode, the text box should have a German text. So I came up with this design flow to import text file which has multi-language version, then tag as English EN, German DE, Japanese JP. So once system knows what language the user is choosing, all the text boxes will have that particular language strings rendered into Qt. So this is a huge difference compared to Photoshop-based or bitmap-based workflow, because when you create all those text in bitmap, all of a sudden you lost the meaning. But the whole point I'm trying to make here is when you have a text object that has a meaning about each languages, that context can be used into the system and then render the design layout as you want. And so here is a couple of references I would like to recommend everybody here. Embedded font license with Monotype. Monotype has a great set of font licensing, and I had a problem about defining typeface for, let's say, between Japanese and European languages, because licensing is different. Then sometimes if you want to have a font that carries 10 different languages, there is no choice. That's part of the reason why some of the Japanese electronics doesn't have a good fonts. Even like in the car area, I'm not happy with seeing some kind of, medical fonts into that interface, but German cars does everything branded font. I was always questioning why, but probably that font is one of the big reasons. And that impression actually dominates the screen design. So I highly recommend going through embedded font license with monotype, and then how you can engage that into Qt. And sometimes, as I said, using a bitmap graphics is cumbersome, and then Qt provides vector font renderings, which is, just beautiful as is. And then multi-language text flow and dynamic layout adjustment can be also made. So you can kind of think about that concept for multiple layout design. Like, some years ago, people are all about responsive design, which basically create the media or output-based design template. So you can apply that to Qt and then use it as language variation. And I would also like to say SVG can be an option to render some text, because certain languages doesn't have or require another text layer. For example, traditional Japanese, traditional Chinese goes from right to left in a vertical direction. And there is no design tools who can support that besides high-end printing software. So how to achieve those text rendering? Well, I have to make it as a SVG. So that's another option, but now you can do that with Qt, which is a blessing. And explaining about bitmap to vector, so that itself can be similar to talking about MCU to embedded, because traditionally MCU had its own memory space. You add some icon graphics and then displaying that on the display screen. It's very basic. So imagine that Nintendo, maybe Super Nintendo screen or 8-bit jaggy screen, that was basically MCU-based technologies. But embedded Linux with font rendering, you can do a lot. So I'm going to show you some UI design with vector-based design tools, featuring Sketch and Qt Bridge today, and as well as Qt design tools by support from Qt guys, Thomas and Corey. So how I do Sketch and Qt workflow. So basically I created a simple prototype. This is my imaginary project. So inside of Sketch, I just added this ring type interface, which is supposed to have a display. Maybe I can use ring as an interface, but I'm not thinking about the interface here. But I use Spotify as my personal choice of music streaming service, Spotify playlist, and then details of playlist, and then album art. And also I added some simple clock face animation here. And then it's all done by Sketch. Object is listed on the left-hand side column here. Then Qt Bridge can actually select each object, export as Qt wants, and then bringing it to Qt workflow, which I'm quite happy and really impressed what Qt can do. So in the Q&A session, we have a desktop app running. So if you have any question in this area, please let us know. And my personal presentation finish here, and we can move to Q&A session.